Hello, everyone. Cecil Martin here.
Hey, this is Hunter Henry.
What's up, man? This is Max Crosby, part of Raider Nation.
Hey, this is Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman.
Hey, it's Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks.
Hey, this is Jerry Judy, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, and you're listening to the 14-Yard NFL Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Full 10 Yards NFL podcast for the first time with me, Sam Moores, as your host. And today I am joined by former host and Cleveland Browns fan, Shaun Blundell. How are you doing today, Shaun, mate? It's good to have you back so soon.
Feels like I've never been away, mate. Yeah, good to be on, mate. Like I said, we will be reviewing and previewing all of the divisions, won't we, between now and kickoff. So, yeah, looking to get stuck into, mate, particularly the good old AFC North with my Browns, as you say, residing over there.
Yeah, as you mentioned, today is the first of our 4 division preview episodes. We'll be diving into both the AFC and the NFC North today. Two of the most competitive division races in football, actually, if you exclude the Bengals, of course, in the AFC North. But, they're sort of the kings. But, ultimately, these two divisions should come down to the wire, really, compared to some, like the AFC South or the West, that you expect to be run away with. But I think, without further ado, Shaun, let's get into it. Let's start with the AFC North, just because, as you said, your Browns are in that division, and we'll start with the reigning champions, the Cincinnati Bengals, who are running it back this year, potentially the last year with their receiving trio of Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. And look, this roster may be as good as it ever gets, especially with Joe Burrow's extension coming as well. That might have been pushed back a little bit at the moment with the injury that he suffered a couple of days ago in training camp. But yeah, the Bengals are still the team to beat in the AFC North, do you think?
Yeah, they probably start as favourites. I think obviously the situation at the minute with Joe Burrow picking up that calf injury during training camp does have potentially quite a big impact on it. It's been quite vague at the moment, hasn't it? It's a case of several weeks, but calf injuries, depending on how significant the injury is, it could be anything from 3 to 4 weeks right up to 10 to 12 weeks. Obviously, coming in training camp would suggest that even if it is on the longer end of the scale, he's still obviously going to play a significant part of the season. But I actually think the AFC North is probably a little bit closer than you've possibly given it credit for there. I don't think the Bengals are runaway favourites. They certainly start as favourites. But I actually think it is really, really competitive. And we'll obviously get into the other teams and probably why I think that is the case as we go through. But like you say, certainly from a talent perspective, particularly, as you say, highlighted by that strong wide receiver core, they certainly have plenty of scope to start as favourites, definitely.
Yeah, and I think there's certainly going to be multiple teams from the AFC North in the playoffs this year. I think that's bound to happen because, like I said, the other 3 teams are all capable of reaching the postseason themselves, and we'll get into them later. As for the Bengals, they've got Orlando Brown coming in on the offensive line this year, which should improve from what we saw last year. Obviously, Lyle Collins got hurt just before the playoffs started, which wasn't great for Burrow and co. His future is actually uncertain as well. He's on the PUP list at the moment. He suffered an ACL at the end of last year. Obviously, that's why they brought in Brown. He's a trade candidate. I've seen teams like Jacksonville be rumoured with Lyle Collins, but they got Jonah Williams and obviously right tackle and Orlando Brown too. And the inside wasn't actually that bad either last year. Like, the offensive line throughout the year improved, and they actually held up a little bit in the playoffs, especially with their main offensive lineman out. You mentioned obviously the calf injury for Joe Burrow. It's not severe, but he will miss several weeks of camp, so he's not going to be playing in the preseason or anything like that. He'll be there for week 1, we expect. But other than that, it's uncertain at the moment. But he's going to get a massive contract. That's coming. Justin Herbert's extension's happened. Burrow will become the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. I think that's pretty common knowledge now, to be honest with you. Weapons wise aside, they've got they've done the restructure of Joe Mixon, which for the Bengals is not a common thing. A lot of teams do restructures to sort of contain a winning period, but the Bengals just don't do that. Obviously, they've been quite stingy recently with the dome thing in the practice facility and everything like that. this is a new Bengals team, and they want to keep hold of this window for as long as possible. But the defense looks different because they've lost one of their big leaders in Jesse Bates. Now they've got a new safety duo in the 2022 first rounder, Daxton Hill and Nick Scott, who's come over from the Rams. Shaun, how big of a miss do you think Jesse Bates will be for the Bengals defense?
I think Jesse Bates, certainly from a talent perspective, obviously very difficult to replace. So I actually think it's the fact that it is the combination of both Bates and Bell, which is the big thing. It would have been an easier pill to swallow had one of the two stuck around. But like you say, losing both is quite a significant blow to the back of that defence. Obviously, as you say, getting two brand new into the position, Dax Hill, certainly, like you said, from a draft profile perspective, certainly big things expected of him. I certainly don't think the Bengals were ever going to pay anything like what Jesse Bates ended up getting in free agency. He was a player that I certainly like the look of in a position of need for my team. But I think, ultimately, when that kind of money's being talked about at a position that, let's be honest, isn't deemed all that valuable in the vast majority of cases, when they start talking the crazy money that he got, you can understand why the Bengals did indeed walk away with all the other talent that they've got to pay. But it's a very well-rounded defence, as you say. I actually think the strength of it probably lies in the front four. I know we've talked a bit there about the back end, but I actually think the front four, I think Trey Hendrickson has been an absolutely fantastic pickup for them. It was one of those that when he signed a couple of years ago, you sort of looked at it and thought, bit of a risk, and he really done it in his contract year at New Orleans. But he has been absolutely phenomenal. Great amount of production that he's been able to get. Even if you look at the sort of cap numbers and everything and the sort of contract value, they've got a real good value for money player there over the course of the next couple of years. So I think Hendrickson will be, will continue to be good. DJ Reed is as good as anybody against the run in terms of stuffing up the middle of the defence. And Sam Hubbard's quite underrated as well. I think he's another one of those players. He's not necessarily going to make anybody's top 5, top 10 edge rushers in the NFL category. But again, he's consistent. He gets plenty of pressure on the passer. So I do think that Bengals defence is, a bit of a dark horse, really, because so much focus and attention goes to the offense. But as you say, the defense actually does more than its fair share for them.
Yeah, and you mentioned the main strength of this team, other than the sort of quarterback and receiver position, is the defensive line. Trey Hendrickson was a great get from New Orleans, like you said, and they've actually got decent corners as well. Obviously, Chidobe Awuzie, Mike Hilton. They're not household names, but they are they've multiple year veterans who've had solid careers in this league. And mentioned obviously the sort of the safety position not being as valuable as other positions. Another position that sort of goes along that lines as well as tight end, and they've brought in Smith from Minnesota. He is a good passing tight end. He's struggled to stay on the field, which is is a bit of a problem. But when he is healthy, he's a great option for Joe Burrow in the red zone, certainly.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes, because I think obviously it's a position that probably doesn't get used all that much in Cincinnati because there's so many 3 wide receiver sets, as you say. Irv Smith's one of those players that I think everybody's been waiting to break out seemingly for the last 5 years, and he hasn't quite necessarily done it yet. It'll be interesting to see how he does get on here. I think if I was to sort of summarise the Bengals, if you like, I think they're very, very strong in key positions. The thing that would concern me if I was a Bengals fan would just be depth. I think depth is a real, I wouldn't say key issue, but I look at the sort of depth chart at the minute. We've mentioned those defensive positions. There's quite a number of rookies that make up the sort of cornerback secondary room, right across the depth chart. So that would be a slight concern. But like you say, they've got plenty of veterans, some good additions, and as I said, they're certainly going to be there or thereabouts, absolutely.
Yeah, they will contend in the playoffs again. They're favourites of the division. This is probably their best shot at the Super Bowl, as I was saying earlier, for a while, if not ever, because they're that loaded. They've got an offensive line now, as long as they can all stay healthy, which has been a worry with the offensive line. But if they can stay healthy and protect Joe Burrow, then he should stay healthy. This is their biggest shot at winning the Super Bowl this is the biggest shot they're ever going to get. This is the end of their window per se, because Burrow's contract is coming, and the rest of the team will suffer for that. So Cincinnati the favourites, top defensive line, great receiver core, decent cornerbacks, good linebackers as well. And let's get on to the next team. Your Browns, Shaun.
Yeah. And I think this is why we start the conversation around the fact that I think, the Bengals are favourites, but there should be plenty of competition. I think if you look at the Browns, and I'll take my Browns sort of jersey and hat off, so to speak, I think if you were to look at it purely from a talent perspective, and if you were to look at it from a team building perspective, the Browns are in a really strong position right across the board, in my opinion. It's quite a rounded roster, so to speak. The big thing, of course, is whether or not number 4 returns to anything like his Houston Texan days. That, of course, being Deshaun Watson. So much talk last off-season, rightfully so. Let's put that to last year's rearview mirror and let's talk about the prospect from the football perspective, which is always a really difficult thing to do. And I've struggled with it enough, as I've said, over the last 12 months. But purely from a footballing perspective, I think I probably really underplayed how significant time in training camp and pre-season and all the rest of it was actually going to be last year for Deshaun Watson. He'd obviously, through choice, not participated the previous year in Houston. So effectively hadn't played football for the best part of getting on towards 3 sort of full calendar years by the time he did actually come back and start playing, which is just ridiculous, really, when you think about it. All signs point to the fact that he looks extremely sharp in camp. I think most quarterbacks tend to look sharp in camp and they've got their little shorts on and nobody can tackle them and all the rest of it. But take it on face value. Obviously, when the Browns made that trade, they knew the kind of reception it was going to receive. They knew the negative vibe that was always going to surround it. They're never going to get away from those negative things, and nor should they. However, from a talent perspective, and this is the thing that sucks with these things, when people are talented, they get given opportunities that other people don't. And there's no doubt from the footballing perspective, if he's anything like he was in his Houston days, Deshaun Watson enters the conversation as one of the premier quarterbacks in the league. His last full season, he led the league in passing in a really, really poor Houston Texans team, where his only viable option was really Brandon Cooks. So, given the fact that he could, in theory, have a much better receiving core to work with, the sky, in theory, is the limit. It'll be really interesting to see how he goes. But obviously, the future of the franchise essentially depends on that trade working out, because if it doesn't, you may as well write the Browns off for the next 4 years, because essentially Deshaun Watson is completely untradeable. His contract's fully guaranteed. So if he's shit, we are in deep doo-doo, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, you've alluded to it there. It's a very important year for Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry as well, because the two have invested a lot into Deshaun Watson. If he has another poor year, or isn't even really a top half quarterback, really, I think they could lose their jobs. He has got one of the best offensive lines in football in front of him. It's not as good as it has been, but it is still up there. You've got some talent on there. You've got the best running back in football, Nick Chubb, as well. I don't know what's really happening with pass catching back. There's mentioned that he could do it all, like a Saquon Barkley role. You've got Demetric Felton as well, who's played running back in the past. But with Deshaun, I personally think, obviously we're talking about the football player here, because the human off the field is a different story, but as a football player, he's probably one of the best quarterbacks I've seen live personally. I think I've seen over half the league when they've come to London, and we've seen some pretty talented quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers, etc. come over. Although Rodgers last year was Rodgers last year, but Deshaun is one of the best quarterbacks I've seen in my own eyes, and obviously on the screen as well. That translates to. he'll be throwing to Amari Cooper. That's obviously nailed on. But behind him, there are a load of guys: Donovan Peoples-Jones, Jakeem Grant, Elijah Moore, Marquise Goodwin, Daya Bell, the third-round rookie from last year. There's many people who many receivers who will or who could play for the Browns, significantly this year. Is anyone that sort of stood out in camp? Have you heard so far, Shaun? Who do you think's sort of going to be there with Amari Cooper?
Yeah, I think the one that's exciting is Elijah Moore. Obviously picked up in a sort of off-season trade with the New York Jets. I think he obviously made a lot of noise of not receiving the ball last year in that offense, particularly when Zach Wilson was playing quarterback. Obviously a bit of a strange one, really, but obviously comes with again, great draft pedigree, certainly. He's looked incredibly impressive. His work ethic, excellent. The Browns did a really good sort of off-season video, which I'm sure all the teams do, and there was a particular episode almost highlighting Elijah Moore for the entirety of it, and he looked excellent. He does, bring a different dynamic. I think the Browns last year lacked speed in the wide receiver position. He brings a touch more speed. Marquise Goodwin, whether he'll play or not, he's unfortunately suffered a little bit of a scare health-wise. They found some blood clots, so we'll see how that progresses. But he was obviously brought in with the intention of stretching the field. And similarly, Jakeem Grant was brought in last year with that intention and ended up on season-ending IR before it got going. So, like you say, the wide receiver room will look totally different, but should be full of options. The biggest addition to the wide receivers or the pass-catching group, there might actually be Jordan Akins.
Yes.
Underrated tight end, in my opinion. Comes in from Houston, got a relationship with Deshaun Watson. He joins David Njoku, who had a breakout season last year, and between them they could form an excellent tandem, certainly when you get down towards the red zone and everything. So I certainly think the Browns stack up well there. In terms of Nick Chubb, yeah, he can do it all, mate. I mean, to be honest, he's my favourite player. He's on my jersey, number 24, wearing it proud. He's just phenomenal. I think it's telling that they haven't actually brought back any depth behind him from last year, because I think they just do trust the fact that he can do all of the sort of facets of the game that he needs to. So certainly offensively in really, really strong position.
On the defensive side of the ball, the defense didn't really play to its talent last year. Myles Garrett aside, obviously getting 16 sacks still. Obviously, you've got Jim Schwartz now as defensive coordinator. You've traded for Zadarius Smith, adding to the pass rush as well. Obviously, Anthony Walker came back and was back from injury as well this year. I like the secondary too. You've got Denzel Ward, who hopefully will have a better year. Greg Newsome in the slot. And obviously, you'll be encouraged by the rookie year of Marvin Emerson as well from last year. This defense should be pretty good this year. Hopefully, it can play better than it did last year.
Yeah, if you talk to any Browns fan, I think pretty much 99.9% of them wanted a change of defensive coordinator halfway through last season. That never came. It's obviously come now. I think the addition of Zadarius Smith, as a replacement for Jadeveon Clowney, is an upgrade. I think Smith is still a player that sort of, he's operating in his prime, whereas Clowney's certainly on the back nine. Dalvin Tomlinson should plug up a lot of holes in the middle. I'd still like to see another big body in there. And as you say, I think the secondary played well at times last year. I think the big addition there is Juan, however you pronounce it, Thornhill, obviously coming in from Kansas City, so a proven track record as a winner. John Johnson III was quite possibly one of the biggest disappointments as a free agent signing after a couple of years. I think when we signed him, it was, lots of people celebrated, but it just never worked out. But like you say, certainly lots expected from this defence. Can Myles Garrett go better in terms of his production? Certainly, that's the hope based on, like I say, the better components around him and that changing D coordinator, which is a scary prospect to think he could be better when you consider already the amount that he's done in the league. Already the franchise leader in sacks and certainly up there in the conversation for, best defensive player in the league.
Yeah, and I mean, you've also got Grant Delpit in that defense as well. He's used all over the place, really, and he's not just stuck there back at safety. But with this Browns team, it's very much like if Deshaun can get back to his former, Houston Texans self, then you could win a division. It's entirely possible, and the AFC North will be very competitive for that as well. And it'd be nice to watch a division battle go down to the wire like it has done in the North for over the years pretty regularly. to be honest with you.
Yeah, I always say, I mean, I don't expect any sympathy whatsoever, but I always say as a Browns fan, it's one of those really frustrating things because even the year that we were quite good, we still only managed to squeak into the wild card with a 11-5 record. It's just one of those divisions. I often think if we played in the AFC South or something, we'd probably be perennial playoff candidates. But yeah, like you say, the talent's there. It's just got to be pulled together. And I think you summed it up nicely right at the start. If they don't, then I do think that there's a few people that will have very warm backsides come the end of the year because, ultimately there's enough investment gone in now to this playing squad that it should be producing some results.
Yeah, and like I said at the start of the summary, I think it will be a telling year for Stefanski and Andrew Berry as well, because especially Berry as well, because he's the one that made the trade for Deshaun Watson. If that started to look really bad, then there could be change there. But I mean, yeah, one of the most interesting teams to watch this year will be with the Browns. Another interesting team to watch will be the Ravens with their new offensive Tom Munkin. Lamar goes into a new system with even more weapons after adding Zay Flowers in the draft and bringing in Odell Beckham Jr. in free agency. But with the Ravens' weapons and Lamar as well, other than Mark Andrews, it's can they still stay healthy? It's be a very tough ask based on history because Odell Beckham, Rashad Bateman, J.K. Dobbins have all missed significant time in the last few years with injury. On paper, this offense could be very good. Lamar's going to be passing the ball a lot more. I think he said that in a few press conferences this year. It is going to be a more pass-heavy offense, which is obviously why they've brought in 2 extra receivers, adding to Rashad Bateman. But I mean, they're a playoff team from a year ago. And they had a ton of troubles last year as well. Obviously, losing Lamar midway through the season, going to Tyler Huntley, defensive players getting injured, running backs getting injured as well. They have depth, and they had depth last year to deal with injuries. They have depth this year to deal with injuries. They're a really deep team. Like you said, maybe the Bengals don't have. Maybe they're not as talented sort of man for man as the Bengals, but they have more depth than the Bengals. I think that's pretty fair to say. It's a second year in Mike Macdonald's defense for Cole Hamilton as well, the rookie from last year. He feels a pretty good. He is part of a pretty good safety duo with him and Marcus Williams. Obviously, came over from the Saints last year. The defense should be actually pretty sound because it's the Ravens' defense. It's their history, it's their blood. It's what the Ravens do, and they get David Ajabo as well. A year removed from his torn Achilles from last year. He came back towards the end of last year, but he did miss most of it. Drafted out of Michigan last year, obviously fellow Brit as well. But all eyes are on the offense and how different it looks and how good Lamar Jackson looks. He's just been paid. This is a big year to Lamar to show: are you a quarterback, or are you a quarterback, elite quarterback, or are you a quarterback who can run? This is a big year for Lamar Jackson as to what he is, and I mean he's got the weapons now to do it. It's just whether they can stay healthy, right?
Yeah, and like you say, health is obviously one of the key factors, and it's probably one of the reasons that there was a little bit of a delay in actually getting Lamar Jackson's contract sorted, wasn't it? As you say, he himself personally has struggled in the last couple of years. And ultimately anybody's best ability, first and foremost, is their availability to actually get out on the field. And as you say, the last 2 seasons, he's missed 5 games in each of those seasons. So it is quite a significant amount of time that he's missed also. He's still a phenomenally good player. Let's not get away from how talented he is.
MVP, of course.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And he has tried, I think, in recent years to reduce the amount of running that he's done. Actually, look at his rushing stats since his sort of 2019 breakout year. So he obviously took over the offense partway through 2018. Mm-hmm. So 2019, he attempted 176 rushes. Went down then to 159, then 133. Last year, he was at 112. So you can see that gradually there has been a shift and a focus on to, more passing from Lamar Jackson. I always say the same thing. I think the Bengals. I always think the Ravens are at their best when they stick to their strengths, which does mean Lamar Jackson running the football a lot more. I think it's become such a big part of the conversation that almost he tries to, go against the grain, if you like. He doesn't like the fact that he's renowned for being a really good running quarterback. And it's almost like, well, if that's all you say I could do, I'll just throw it all over the yard. And when he starts to throw it all over the yard, that's when the Ravens seemingly become a little bit more vulnerable. It's not to say that he can't throw. I'm not one of these people that pigeonhole him and say you can only do this, that, or the other. He's obviously extremely talented. But certainly I think the Ravens as a team, as an identity, are at their best when they do let Lamar Jackson run. I'm a huge J.K. Dobbins fan.
It's a contract year for him as well, so it's a very important year, especially the running back position. Obviously, been talked about a lot at the moment. It's a very big year for J.K. Dobbins.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of his. I do doubt whether he will stay fit, though.
No, he's been injured the last 2 years.
Yeah, which is a real shame. I think Gus Edwards is really underrated as well. He's the same, those struggles with injuries. They brought Melvin Gordon in, which probably tells you all that you need to know, because at least with Melvin Gordon, if nothing else, he's durable. But certainly the talent is in Dobbins and Edwards. But like I say, we will wait and see. But yeah, certainly from an offensive point of view, as I say, for me, they're at the best when they do sort of stick to what gets them the results. It'll be interesting to see Zay Flowers. Interesting for the Ravens to spend a first-round pick at that position. It's not something they've done all that much of. Again, it seems to be a bit of a change in emphasis that, yes, we will throw it more and we'll get some weapons. I've got to be honest, I find the Odell Beckham signing one of the most peculiar of the off-season. And I'm not saying that with any bitterness or anything like that from his time in Cleveland. I just find it a very, very strange thing for a guy that missed all of last year injured, had his fair share of difficulties in his time with Cleveland, slightly improved when he went to the Rams, but I think, let's be honest, he was very much the third option on that team when he went there. So he did what a third wide receiver should do. I think to bring him in and to pay him the amount that they're paying him, which, okay, it's only 1 year, but I just think it was a really strange signing. $15 million, fully guaranteed contract. Just seemed like a bizarre move to me, but we'll obviously wait and see. He'll have a chip on his shoulder. He'll have a point to prove, but I wouldn't be sitting here in the off-season particularly terrified of the thought that Odell Beckham's going to be the real difference maker in this side.
Yeah, it's interesting to think who will be sort of Lamar's number one target as well, because it's not really clear. Like I said, you've got Bateman, you've got Flowers, the rookie, you've got Odell Beckham Jr. Odell, I don't think he's going to be a number one, because that's not what he is anymore. He can't stay healthy. Like I said, in the Rams, that playoff run with the Rams is probably the best he's looked since his time with the Giants, I'd say, if not maybe 1 year in Cleveland. But it's that playoff run with the Rams as the third receiver. The Super Bowl, he started off greatly before, obviously, the injury. But it's you'd like to think it'd be Rashad Bateman as number one receiver because he's been there before. He's got the connection with Lamar. Obviously, the other two are new. But it's a nice problem to have, having three weapons. Again, whether they can stay healthy, and that basically that will, in my opinion, sort of sort the Ravens away from, if this offense goes, if this offense takes off, they could be a real contender this year. But if it's if it's not the best, if it's good but not and your receivers get hurt, then the Ravens season, they might make the playoffs like they did last year, but I can't see them going very far. But it all revolves around Lamar. Again, if Lamar can stay healthy this year, that's the key for the Ravens. And again, they also could contend for this AFC North.
Yeah, no, like you said, they're definitely in the conversation. I think the two teams that we've left till the end, and I'll give special mention when we get to the Steelers in a minute to the guy in their head coaching position, but the longevity of Harbaugh and Tomlin, you will be hard pushed to see a poor Baltimore Ravens team whilst John Harbaugh is in charge.
They're going to get 8 wins or so. That's what you'd expect. It's the same with Belichick now with the Patriots. So he's sort of gone down a little bit recently, but he's still, because of the hard defense they play, they know how to win football games, situationally as well, which some young coaches they haven't got experience of. That John Harbaugh obviously both winning Super Bowls as well. Those two coaches again are. Well, in longevity, obviously they're up there in the league, but they're also they're consistent top 5, top 10 coaches throughout their tenures of their time. That's why they're still here today, and none of them are on hot seat. They're not going to go anytime soon unless they retire potentially or fancy a new challenge. They are top tier organisations, the Ravens and the Steelers, and that's why they've been in the playoff hunt for the last 15 years or so. You think that way. And on that note, we'll get into the Steelers now. It's year 2 for Kenny Pickett. I like what I saw a lot at the end of last year. Actually, he got more aggressive because at the start of the year he was quite conservative, throwing downfield more. He helped the team to 5 wins in the last 6 games. Finished 9-8, just off the playoffs. Actually, people forget that about Pittsburgh last year. The protection should be better too. They signed Isaac Seumalo on in a free agency deal from the Eagles. Has obviously just reached Super Bowl with the Eagles last year, and they're slowly building a roster that could contend in the future if Pickett hits as well. If he can take a second year jump, this Steelers team is going under the radar in my opinion because they have no big free agents not in the offseason this year, so they're keeping everyone back next year. They've got a bit of cap room. They brought back the likes of Larry Ogunjobi to the defensive line, which is very scary with TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, who just signed a new deal. And cornerback was a need in the offseason. Obviously losing lots of Cam Sutton to Detroit. They added Patrick Peterson experience, and they also brought in Joey Porter Jr., who obviously his dad was with Tomlin and the Steelers before, and that's a nice story there. But the Steelers, pretty young team, but they're flying under the radar in my opinion.
Yeah, look, I think Kenny Pickett was much better than advertised last year. I say better than advertised because obviously he came with again, sort of, he was one of those, wasn't he? Before the draft actually happened, people were talking about the fact that he might sneak up into, quite, high draft selections, and obviously ended up going in the first round. So I suppose when you say better than expected, he ultimately was a first round pick, but I think he was one of those viewed more as a bit of a projection. Obviously didn't start the season, and obviously when he did come in, as you say, certainly to begin with, little bit of a handbrake on, didn't necessarily push the ball down the field too much, but I certainly
had a couple of concussions as well. That happened as well. He had a couple of concussions. Obviously, did better than Tua did with those, but he did have a couple. I'm a Dolphins fan, so I can make that joke. But he did deal with a couple of concussions as well. Missed a game in the season, but yeah, like you're saying, again, he had a really good rookie season compared to some that we've seen.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like you say, I think he was building blocks for the Steelers to sort of be encouraged by to take another look. This year, I think that the problem the Steelers will have is they will consistently finish similar to what we just said about Baltimore with 7, 8, 9 wins. I mean, there's this obviously long-standing record now that Mike Tomlin's never had a losing season. Obviously went into last season looking very much like that was going to happen, and then, as you say, won 5 of the last 6, including the last one when sitting at 8-8, which obviously could have meant the losing season. But as you say, they still managed to pull it out the bag, so they'll always be there or thereabouts. I think they obviously need much greater production from the wide receiver core compared to what they got last year. Deontay Johnson had quite a down year compared to where things had been. He's almost sort of by default made himself the number 1 receiver in Pittsburgh. They obviously had Juju Smith-Schuster and Chase Claypool going back just a couple of years, but Johnson's been the one that stuck around, and he's obviously become, like I say, almost the focal point of that group. But last year, managed 882 receiving yards on 86 grabs, but none of them found the end zone. Which, if your number 1 wide receiver is not catching 1 touchdown pass all year, that tells you all that you need to know. So they're obviously going to look for much greater production there. George Pickens showed some flashes as a rookie.
They're really excited about him as well.
Yeah, and everybody probably remembers the over-the-shoulder, Odell Beckham-esque catch. But again, lovely to have a splash play, don't get me wrong. But again, you're going to want a lot more in terms of touchdowns and production from him. And they've obviously taken a bit of a flyer, in my opinion, on Allen Robinson. I say a flyer because 12 months ago, I think he was, again, one of the more coveted free agents, and then obviously had a really, really disappointing year in LA. So hopefully for the Steelers' perspective, that'll be nothing more than a blip. and he'll get back to being something like the big-bodied wide receiver that we have been used to seeing over the years. So there's three talented options there. Whether they can actually pull it out the bag in terms of, as I say, increasing that production level will be the thing to obviously take note of. But certainly there's some players there for Kenny Pickett to continue his development with.
I mean, you've got Pat Frymuth at tight end as well, who's had a strong couple of years. You've got Najee Harris at running back, who's got a bit of competition actually now at the minute, but he is still, a top half running back in this league. And I mean, like you said with Allen Robinson as well, like he is this is his last chance to revive his career to what he was, because again, like you said, he's a big deals in Chicago and the Rams. The last 2 years of the Bears and the Rams have been awful, really. He was coveted as one of the free agents, like I said, the top free agents last year. It was a top fantasy option last year going into the year, and then it was cut pretty quickly from a lot of people, including myself. But the Steelers' offense is really good. It has potential to be really good because the offensive line should get better. You've got a running game there. The receivers is the real question, but they're really excited about George Pickens. And it's the defense. You've got probably one of the best pass rushers in TJ Watt. You've got Alex Highsmith, like I was saying. You've got Landon Roberts coming in from New England at Miami at linebacker. He was in New England, obviously. Which is a bit of a weird one because I don't really know what's going to happen at linebacker. Obviously, they've moved on from Devin Bush and Miles Jack this offseason, so it's a completely new sort of philosophy at linebacker. But obviously, Mike Tomlin will know what he's doing. Obviously, Brian Flores was linebackers coach with the Steelers last year as well, so there's that too. And safety, they've lost Terrell Edmonds, but they're still looking pretty good back there. Minka Fitzpatrick, obviously, he's a tad bit overrated in my opinion, but he's still a really good safety. This Steelers team should compete. And again, like if the Bengals take a step back, if there's an injury, then any of these teams could win the North. I mean, this team could win the North anyway, especially if Pickett or has a second year jump like he did, or progresses to a level like he did at the end of last year where he got clearly better. This Steelers team is really exciting for the future.
Yeah, like I say, I think they've certainly got some building blocks to work around. I think the defense is good because you've got playmakers at all three levels. I think that's always the sign of a good defense. As you say, Minka Fitzpatrick's a bit of a ball hawk at the back end. TJ Watt, phenomenal up front. And I think Alex Highsmith is, again, one of those players that's probably a bit of an underrated do-it-all linebacker. So, as you say, they've certainly got talent at all three levels of the defense. We touched on the offense. I mean, the only thing for me, I would like to... I'd like nothing more than the Steelers to suck, but being completely unbiased, I'd like to see the Steelers probably get a little bit better at tackle. I think the interior, the offensive line is pretty good, but I think on the outsides, obviously see what happens in terms of Broderick Jones, the rookie that they brought in with the intention of starting at left tackle. But certainly they'll be looking for probably better protection from the outside of that offensive line. But certainly when you consider it, felt as though the sky was falling a couple of years ago when Big Ben sort of was retiring. Or certainly the year that he probably played 1 year too many, in all honesty. I mean, it almost ended up as a bit of a fairy tale because he got them to the playoffs, but it felt like a season too far. It felt then, all of a sudden the Steelers are going to fall off a cliff. But as I said, special mention to Mike Tomlin. Being completely unbiased, probably for me, the best coach in the NFL, in terms of what he's been able to achieve with the roster that he's got there. And I would again expect them to be, as you say, there or thereabouts. They're always going to be one of those teams, when they pull up the graphic at the end of the year and it's like, who's in the hunt for the playoffs?
Yeah, they'll always be in the hunt.
They're always there, there. Even coming into, like you say, week 18, they'll probably still just about be on there. They might need a million results to go their way, but they'll probably still be in there fighting. So, yeah, I'd expect similar from the Steelers again.
Okay, well, that completes the AFC North. A very competitive division, and it will come down to the final few weeks, even if the Bengals do have a sort of resume their dominance as they have the last few years. Onto the NFC North. This one is anyone's game to call, really. And we'll start with the Chicago Bears. We'll go by alphabetical order again, because this is the year that we're looking for Justin Fields to take the next step as a passer. He's a huge storyline coming into this year. people think he's poised for like a Jalen Hurts style leap. Just becoming an accurate passer like that. Obviously, he's got the arm, he's got the legs as well. He took over games with his legs last year. His best game of the year last year was against my Dolphins. He ran over us for over 100 yards, maybe even 150, perhaps. Like that game, the Dolphins were lucky to win that game in Chicago. He actually has the most bets on him to win MVP this year as well, which is very interesting. I saw that on Twitter this morning. Like I said, he learned to use his legs more as a weapon last year because he wasn't really coveted as a running quarterback coming into the league. He had the ability to do it, but he's not like, it wasn't like Lamar Jackson where he's like, oh, he can do this. Last year he used his legs and then he started using them more and more and more and more as the season went on, to the point where it was like, okay, Justin Fields is a top running quarterback in football. Obviously, he's got some new pass catchers as well. He's got DJ Moore coming in for the obviously after the trade down from number 1 with Carolina. And he's got protection this year as well, and Darnell Wright, who came in, obviously their first round pick as well. I still think they're one receiver away from a top unit. Obviously, they brought in Chase Claypool from the Steelers last year. And I mean, Darnell Mooney is okay. He's a side option, good sort of receiver 3 on fantasy, that kind of thing. And they've obviously just extended Cole Kmet 4-year, $50 million, which is quite a lot. But last year he was Fields' number 1 guy in the red zone. Got 7 touchdowns last year, career high by far. And they added Robert Tonyan as well from the Packers, so that's another tight end for Justin Fields to have in the red zone. The defense has got better too, but obviously the offense last year they ran the ball like 56% of the time. For a team that didn't have really a number 1 running back, like David Montgomery was good, but he wasn't like Nick Chubb or for example, like the Chicago ran the ball a lot last year, obviously with Fields too. But now they've got a sort of pass offense that they can lean on too. Hopefully, hoping that Fields takes that next step as a passer.
Yeah, I think the thing is with Justin Fields, I think it needs to be put into context because you obviously described it there as taking the next step. The reality is he needs to take a good few strides
as a passer. Yes, that's the thing. Yeah,
because if you look at the stats again from last year, like you say, rushing wise, you're talking Lamar Jackson type numbers. 1143.
That's what I mean.
1143 in terms of yards on the ground, 8 touchdowns. A lung of 67, which suggests that he's always one play away from.
That was against the Dolphins as well.
Thought I'd mention it for you.
Yeah.
But from a passing perspective, you look at that, and yards on the entire season, 2,200. 2,242 yards in 15 games. It's not even averaging 200 yards a game. It's a really, really, really poor return. So. Would I expect it to improve? Yeah, absolutely. When you look at, as you say, at what the wide receiver room is to start this season compared to what it was to start last season, you would suggest that Moore and Claypool would be viewed as an upgrade. Certainly DJ Moore, I think, again, one of the names that probably goes under the radar a little bit because he doesn't necessarily have the splash plays that the likes of, your Tyreeks and your receivers of that ilk have, but I think DJ Moore is an excellent option. So again, he's certainly got some potential there. I like Cole Kmet. You've mentioned about the fact that they're giving him a new contract. So, I think he's a promising young tight end. So good on him. Be interesting to see if that relationship does continue to blossom, as it's shown signs of potentially doing in the early days. But it was a really, really good year for Chicago to land the number 1 pick, wasn't it? They've landed fortunate in that they didn't need the quarterback. It was quite a quarterback-heavy class. There were obviously a number of teams that did need the quarterback, so the Bears were able to utilise that to their advantage, and that's why I think a lot of people are keen on them to be quite a bounce-back candidate. And I could understand a little bit of the hype around Justin Fields because I think people probably look at the division. We'll talk about the other teams coming up, but certainly uncertainty around the Packers with their change of quarterback. I think people are excited by the Lions, but because it's the Lions, it's a case of believe it when we see it because, there's been plenty of false dawns in Detroit previously. And obviously, again, we'll touch on it more when we get to them, but Minnesota won so many close games last year. You still probably don't know, are they just a really good team or were they just a team that were quite fortunate and on the end of the right results last year? So I can understand why there is the hype there, but I still think, let's not get away from the fact that this team didn't just finish bottom of the division, and they didn't finish bottom of the division with a 7-10 record or anything like that. They were the worst team in the NFL last year. To expect that team to go from worst to first in the division is probably a bit of a stretch. To go from worst to all of a sudden having the league MVP probably feels like a leap too far in my book.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the defense. I was going to mention the defense. Sorry, you mentioned the worst in football. Their defense was the worst in football last year, especially points per game, 29th in yards per game. The run defense was abysmal. The two new linebackers they signed in free agency, starting free agency this year, were Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards, obviously from the Bills and the Eagles. They also, as cornerback, they drafted second-round rookie Tariq Stevenson out of Miami as well. That defense should get better. It's still not where it could be, but it should be better last year. Obviously, adding 3 players there, as well as pass rushers, interior as well. It's sort of had a bit of an overhaul this year. But the Bears are, I'll probably say, the fourth most talented team. But if Justin Fields can play well, or if he can make a step up, then they could be there and thereabouts towards the end of the season because of how close this division could be. And that they're an interesting team to watch this year, as actually all these teams we're talking about today are. But the Bears, they should improve. Whether they're worst to first or not, they are a candidate for that. But I think teams like the Falcons are sort of more likely to do that than the Bears personally. But the future would be looking bright if they figure out what Justin Fields can be for them in the future, really.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing for them that will determine whether this is a successful season or not. I would temper expectations. I'm not as high on the Bears as probably yourself there. I would be really surprised if they were a worst to first candidate. You mentioned those moves in the linebacker room. I found that a little bit strange as well, to let Roquan Smith depart last year to then sign 2 players to replace him. And it seems as though linebacker is again one of those positions that's probably not as important as it once was in the NFL because it's so pass heavy and all the rest of it. So that seemed to me a little bit of a strange one. But like you say, for me, success this year for Chicago will be, can Justin Fields improve that throw in? And when I say improve it, you're looking at, I would be wanting another 1,300 yards on top of that. I think you should be looking at 3,500 yards as a minimum. He only threw 11 interceptions last year, which isn't too bad. But obviously, bearing in mind, he only actually attempted 318 passes. Realistically, you want those attempts probably up around the 500 mark. And you're on, like I say, probably 3,000, 3,500 yards to sort of get a better idea, if you like, of is his arm going to be something that we can actually rely upon. But, like I say, building in the right direction, I think they'll take advantage of the situation that they found themselves in this year in terms of the draft. They're carrying a little bit of dead money in terms of Robert Quinn this year. They've got like 13-odd million on the cap for Robert Quinn, which is a bit of a blow for any team to carry. But outside of that, like you say, I think when you look to the future, I don't think they're in too bad a shape from what I've sort of seen through like over the cap and all those kind of things. So certainly a franchise that's poised to turn it around, but I would temper expectations that 2023 will be anything more than a few building blocks towards a brighter day.
There we are. We'll move on to the Lions now, who are really, talk of the league at the moment after a very strong end to last season, winning 8 of their last 10 games to almost, have a playoff spot. Obviously, they could have had results gone their way before the Sunday football game against Green Bay last year. But they did stop Green Bay from getting in the playoffs. Obviously, a really weird farewell for Aaron Rodgers at Lambeau Field, that was. And after years of misery in the division, it's 32 years since the Lions last made the playoffs when they won the division in 1991. Some franchises weren't even around at that point. It's that long ago. And years of the Packers quarterbacks, obviously Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers dominating the division. But Minnesota in the time doing well. The Bears reached a Super Bowl in that time as well. The Lions could finally return to the postseason this year. This is the best position for them. Potentially, like I said earlier, we don't really know, but potentially it could be the best position they've had for a long time. They actually are the favourites of the division. I looked on 888 Sport, obviously our partners, before 10 yards this morning, and they are the favourites of the division at 13-10. Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, is back after a few head coach interviews last year. He had a great offense last year, made Jared Goff look the best he has since the Super Bowl campaign of the Rams, Super Bowl year campaign of the Rams. He should be better in his second year in the system as well. The offense was great last year. It was a Lions defense that was the issue last year, and it cost them a lot of games. They got torn apart in the air last year, and although it improved down the stretch, obviously they won games down the stretch, and the points went down significantly, they still have revamped the secondary. The passing defense cost him a playoff spot really last year. When you think about it, they've added Emmanuel Mosley from San Francisco. He got hurt last year, but he has been good recently. You've got Cam Sutton coming from Pittsburgh. You've got CJ Gardner-Johnson as well, who has had a little bit of a niggle in training camp, but hopefully he plays. You've drafted Brian Branch as well from Alabama, the safety. That's 4 new defensive backs in there. On paper now, the secondary is looking pretty good. They've moved on from Jeff Okudah as well. He's now in Atlanta. It's a complete revamped secondary. If they can hit the ground running, this Detroit team could be a lot better, especially on the defensive side of the ball, with first-round rookie Jack Campbell as well, the linebacker too.
Yeah, let's be honest, the Detroit Lions were the team that everybody watched last year when they weren't watching their own team, because they just had that perfect balance, didn't they? They could score 1 million points and also give up 1 million. So they generally were involved in exciting games. And I think that's why people have brought into them and want to see the success, because ultimately this game is about nothing more than entertainment, first and foremost. And the Detroit Lions are an entertaining team to watch. I think the offense, as you say, should, in theory, be similar to last year. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown really announced himself last year. I've always been an admirer, but I thought last year we just took his game to a whole new level. He was absolutely phenomenal for them. You look at the other names in the room, Marvin Jones Jr., been there, done it, got the T-shirt, wily veteran now. He'll get his fair share of targets. Although Josh Reynolds, again, probably one of his better seasons. Good rounded group there. I think the offensive line is a really good offensive line.
It's one of the best in football.
Absolutely. Taylor Decker, Penny Sewell. So again, good across there. And obviously they brought in 2 new running backs, haven't they? I think that's the big difference this year. I think that will be interesting to see, because I think, not so much DeAndre Swift. I don't think that ever necessarily worked out. But Jamal Williams obviously had a good season in Detroit last year. So obviously a new pairing this year in terms of David Montgomery and obviously the rookie Jamal Gibbs. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Gibbs win that training camp battle. He probably starts the pre-season on the depth chart at number 2, but I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Gibbs ultimately handling the bulk of the work. So offensively, you look at it and you think, well, there aren't many weaknesses. If you were to point at a weakness, you'd probably be really harsh to say the weakness is Jared Goff. But realistically, would success for Detroit be getting to the playoffs this year? I suppose it would be. But ultimately, like everybody, once you get there, you are playing for the ultimate prize, and Jared Goff's probably proved throughout his career he's not quite going to get you there.
He can get there, but can't win the big game. He's got it before, but that's the thing, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the awkward thing with a player like that, isn't it? Because who are the Lions going to get that's better than Jared Goff if they'd sort of cut him this season or whatever the case may have been? Similar to the conversation we just had around the Steelers and that kind of thing. If you're going to be picking that high in the draft, it's going to be unlikely. Good quarterbacks generally don't get to free agency. We've obviously seen a lot more trades in recent years than we probably have done historically. But really, quarterbacks don't become available. Jared Goff is a really good quarterback, in my opinion. He's one of those, he's a bit of a pulverising character. But it's one of those. When he's good, he can be really, really good. And obviously, he had a good year last year. So I'm certainly excited offensively. Let's put it that way, mate.
Yeah, and they're a very young team as well. You have to remember. I mean, almost half of this team have got to be under the age of 25 or so. They got a ton of rookies the last couple of years that have come in. Like I said, this year 4 or 5 rookies are going to play make a big impact. You've got Jahmyr Gibbs, like you were saying. You've got Sam Laporta at tight end, who was drafted in the second round. He was actually the second tight end drafted, actually, behind Dalton Kincaid, when he was actually, among people's boards, like third or fourth or fifth. But I did a lot of work on tight ends this year because the Dolphins, well, they lost Mike Gesicki, so needed a new one. They didn't end up getting one until the sixth round in Elijah Higgins, but who was a converted receiver from Stanford. But Sam Laporta was my second receiver as well, actually, because he's an Iowa tight end, which obviously they have a history of producing tight ends. Obviously, TJ Hawkinson, the man he's replacing, was an Iowa tight end. George Kittle was an Iowa tight end. There's many more as well in the league. They're not the only ones. So Sam Laporta will have a big role straight away. Jack Campbell as well. He joins the linebacker core of Alex Anzalone and Malcolm Rodriguez as well, who had a good year. Obviously, was a Hard Knocks star last year as well. And Brian Branch as well. There's 4 rookies there that, first couple round picks that will play on top of Aiden Hutchinson, who had a decent rookie year. Not didn't take the league by storm, but he still showed that he will be a top edge rusher potentially in future. And also you've got Jameson Williams, who's their sort of, if they can get him on the field, and they've had a year and a half now really of issues with Jameson Williams now, because obviously came in last year, was injured at the start, didn't really play well when he came onto the field, and obviously he played like 1 game, 2 games I think, and then this year he's had an injury in training camp, and he's suspended for the first 6 games as well. Obviously the Lions betting thing that took down many players on the team this season. I think he was the only one that actually survived as well. A lot of them were just cut instantly after the suspensions came in. But Jameson Williams obviously drafted top 10, or if not just below the top 10 last year. If they can get him on the field, he will be a big thing as well, pairing the likes of Amon St. Brown, Josh Reynolds, Marvin Jones. They've also got Denzel Mims as well, who had a good first year of the Jets and sort of just gone away recently. Obviously, they brought in Corey Davis and Elijah, but the Jets have been really unlucky with receivers recently, so he's looking to rebound his career. Like the offense should be very good. It's just whether the defense can step up, really. And I mean, if they can, the Lions, like I said, 8 have them as favourites of the division. They probably are the favourites of the division, other than Minnesota potentially. Those two are the favourites at the moment, because the Packers and the Bears are really uncertain what they'll be.
I think 13-10 is a little bit skinny, if I'm honest. I'll leave that to the betting guys. But as I said earlier, I think when you start talking about the Lions, it is a case of, let's believe it when we see it. And I think we all wanted to believe it last year. And I think they gave us plenty of reason to believe it last year. As I said, I think most people from a neutral perspective would want to see Detroit probably win this division. And as you say, certainly from an offensive point of view, there's plenty of excitement. If I'm honest, from a defensive point of view, hopefully Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, it isn't too serious. That tends to be what the reports are, so let's hope he's sort of fit and healthy. He could make a huge difference in that secondary. You'd expect Hutchinson, as you said, to sort of come on in his sophomore campaign. So there's certainly potential there for the Lions to be good. I think probably just about favourites, but like I say, 13-10 is interesting. I hope you've done your research on what price the Vikings are, because that'll be a nice debate once we get on to Minnesota.
They were second, and it was very close. I think it was like 9-4 or something like that. So it was pretty close. We'll get on to the team in between the Lions and the Vikings, the Packers now, and they're one of the most difficult teams to predict this year. Obviously, we've hardly seen Jordan Love at quarterback. He's played a few games against Kansas City, against Philadelphia as well, I believe. How he fares will basically determine the season. Well, the Packers themselves are a pretty young team. They're in a bit of a rebuild, really. They started to rebuild the last couple of years, obviously losing the likes of Devontae Adams. Their offense, especially, the line's not young, but their skill positions on offense, the receiver, tight end, are very young. And the defense as well, they keep adding first-round picks on defense. There's obviously a bit of a thing with Brian Gutekunst. Obviously, all he does is really draft defensive players. That is true, but if you keep adding first rounders to your defense is potentially going to be very good for years and years and years to come. The thing that I'm interested in is, will Matt LaFleur run the ball more now that Jordan Love is in at quarterback rather than Aaron Rodgers? Because obviously he's from the Mike Shanahan tree, obviously Kyle Shanahan as well, Sean McVay, Mike McDaniel. There's so many play calls in the league. Mike McDaniel, who was with the Jets last year, Mike Kaflo was with the Jets last year. That sort of tree has produced so many ones, and they're obviously it's a QB friendly system which will suit Jordan Love, but also it's built on running the ball as well, especially the Shanahan side of it. Last year when Rodgers' play obviously wasn't great, they ran the ball more by about 2%. So the run play percentage was 43%, when the year before it was 41%, which is sort of middle of the league. You think that's sort of where the Rams were as well last year, with McVay and Stafford. If you look towards Kyle Shanahan's 49%, that's sort of where I could see them being potentially, especially with a young quarterback like we've seen with San Francisco, because they have quarterbacks going like this at this rate. Really, it's like a turnstile. Really, 49ers quarterback over the years. It's not going to be at 55% like Chicago and Atlanta were last year, but I expect them to run the ball more to help Jordan Love settle.
Yeah,
especially the two running backs as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go with something quite controversial here. I think the Green Bay Packers could end up in the top 5 of the NFL draft next year.
Wow.
I really, really worry for the Green Bay Packers. And the reason that I worry is, you've said there a few times, a lot of it depends on Jordan Love. And we often just look to the quarterback, and absolutely, obviously, what he does, he's going to be massive. But generally speaking, when a new quarterback comes in, they've usually got a pretty reliable veteran wide receiver. They've got a bit of a security blanket to throw the ball to. They've got a big body tight end that becomes a red zone target. You look at this depth chart, and it's not there.
I mentioned it earlier. It's the receivers and tight ends are really young. They drafted 2 tight ends. They drafted a receiver as well who's meant to start, apparently. Like I said, Jayden Reed, the receiver, is meant to start in the slot. Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft were both tight ends in the first 3 rounds as well. That's 3 young pass catchers who are going to play a big impact on the offense, as well as Romeo Dobbs last year. Christian Watson was a rookie last year as well. That's a very, very young pass catching group there.
It is, mate, and you look even beyond the ones that we mentioned there, like you say, Watson and Dobbs are in sort of year 2. You mentioned Jayden Reed. You look at the rest of the depth chart, I can see 6 wide receivers that are rookies on that depth chart. And that for me is a huge, huge worry. I mean, I would further it as well by saying I am amazed that they haven't brought in an experienced quarterback into the room. You look at who's backing up Jordan Love.
They keep bringing in like sort of XFL guys to come in with visitors and stuff. So they're not even sold in the quarterback room as it is now. Really, it is an interesting thing. I don't really understand what they're going on. Obviously, they're hoping Jordan Love is the thing. That it was very controversial to draft him at a time when you have Aaron Rodgers, in 2020. So obviously they must have seen something. But then saying that the Niners saw something in Trey Lance and he might not ever play again for them. So it is interesting what those two teams in the NFC have done recently.
It is interesting, but like I say, I find it strange that, like I say, there just isn't a veteran quarterback that they can either fall back to if it goes disastrously, or is at least somebody there that can help Jordan Love through. Aaron Rodgers doesn't strike the neutral as somebody, let's be honest, that has a lot of patience in terms of teaching somebody else. Aaron Rodgers seems very much centered around what's in it for Aaron Rodgers, and let's be honest, outside of that, he doesn't really seem to care too much. That could be completely wrong, but that's certainly the impression that he gives externally. When you look at the fact that you could bring in somebody like Teddy Bridgewater, for example, Teddy Bridgewater's not going to set many hearts racing in terms of, oh, great, we've got Teddy Bridgewater. But what he brings you is a steady pair of hands that has been around the league and potentially, as I say, can act as a little bit of a mentor, or certainly as a viable option to help bring some of these young pass catchers on and these young tight ends on, because, that's the thing for me that I really, really do worry about when I look at this. I think I'd look at Aaron Jones in terms of will they run the ball more in his prime. Yeah, Aaron Jones, one of the top backs in the league. He has some games where he feels as though he's run for 200 yards and he's caught for 6 passes, and then the next week he'll have like 3 catches at 3 carries. Sorry, he's never been used consistently.
But you got AJ Dillon there as well. That is the thing.
Yeah, I was going to say it's almost like a two-headed monster now, isn't it, with AJ Dillon? So it would
He's
suggest
he's in the contract year as well. That's another run about.
it would suggest that they would or should at least lean on that run game more. But let's face it, if I was an NFL head coach, I sit and talk about this for a few hours on a Monday night. Right, I'm sure that even I could put a game plan together, which would just be right. You're going to beat us through the air. Simple as that. You would have 8 men, 9 men boxes, and you would just trust your 2 corners on an island against their 2 second-year receivers and say, right, come and beat us if you can. I really, really worry for this Packers team, and I think they are potentially primed for a very, very high selection in the draft next year.
And I think it's fair to say that their stars on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, you've got Jair Alexander, Shaun Gary, plenty of others as well there. They did struggle to get sacks last year. Kenny Clark, another one. They added Lucas Van Ness in the first round, obviously another first round defensive player that we were saying last year. It's a big year as well for Rashawn Gary as well because he is their only really big free agent. But the defensive side of the ball was okay. A lot of young players, obviously, especially Quay Walker, for example, as well. Another one drafted last year. The defense should be better. Should be the best unit on this team. You'd like to think, especially the amount of resources they've invested in it. But the reason why the Packers are quite young is because they got $40 million of dead cap with Aaron Rodgers. They're still paying for that. Obviously, next year they won't have to do that, but this year they're still paying for $40 million. They're paying Aaron Rodgers more than the Jets are this year. They're paying Aaron Rodgers. That's why he's probably taking a pay cut this year as well, because he's obviously the Packers are paying for a lot of it. It's like, what I mean? It's like I started this by saying it's a transition year. It's a young team. If Jordan Love can hit the ground running, then potentially they could sneak into the playoffs. But I think it's fair to say they're not favourites for the division for the first time in a while. And like the Bears, we don't know what we're going to see this year. They could be good. They could suck, like you're saying, Shaun.
Yeah, and look, like you say, I mean, so much of it does depend on Jordan Love, as we talked about there defensively. I think the defence is pretty good, just to sort of give the defence some props as you've done there. I think, as you say, they've invested heavily in it. When you look at it, Devontae Wyatt, first-round pick, Quay Walker, first-round pick, Jair Alexander, first-round pick, Darnell Savage, first-round pick. You can go all through the defence, and as you say, that's where they've stocked it up, isn't it? So they've certainly got talent on that side of the ball. The thing that concerns me is just how much is that defence going to be on the field, because it doesn't matter how good you are. Once you're gassed, once you're having to, keep teams to less than 14 points to be competitive in games, you're going to really start to struggle. And as I say, I just purely from a perspective of, as I say, not having any sort of veteran presence on that offense at all, really.
You got Bakhtiari, but he might not stay healthy either. He's had injury issues.
And I was just going to say that, even if you look at the line, Josh Myers, second year, John Runyon, third year, Tom Zach, second year. It's even the line is a young line. For me, it's a really, really unhealthy situation that they've allowed to sort of manifest itself there in terms of the offense. You can always look back with hindsight now, but giving Aaron Rodgers that contract when they did probably wasn't the best idea. They sort of obviously went all in, and it's backfired, and now it's backfired. They're going to have to suck it up. And like I say, I seriously think there could be a really, really disappointing year in Green Bay. If you were saying to me now, are they more likely to make the playoffs or end up with the number 1 draft pick? I would go with the number 1 draft pick out of those 2 options.
Interesting. That is interesting. And we'll go for the team that did make the playoffs in the NFC North last year, the Minnesota Vikings. They obviously are the reigning champions. They went 13-4 last year, winning 11 one-score games, which is unheard of, really, before a very disappointing wildcard game against the Giants. The offense was very good last year. It should be with like Justin Jefferson on that offense. He's the best receiver in football, I'd say, other than maybe Tyreek Hill, and he's better than Devontae Adams. And they've lost Dalvin Cook. That is they've moved on from him. But I mean, should Alexander Mattison get through his hamstring injury that he suffered in camp yesterday, he is more than capable. We've seen that in his time when Dalvin Cook has not been healthy. That Mattison has still been a very good option at running back for the Vikings in fantasy as well. He's been a very good option recently over the years. They've also got 7th round rookie Dwayne McBride, who is apparently having a very good camp as well. And for Kirk Cousins, it's a second year in Kevin O'Connell's scheme. It's a big year too because he's a free agent this year, and there's already talk that he could be on the move. As obviously he's a perfect QB for Kyle Shanahan's system in San Francisco. I've seen that a lot recently. He is. That's the truth. That is his bread and butter. This is a massive year for Kirk Cousins because I mean, from the quarterback show on Netflix, I've come away from watching that show and thinking I like Kirk Cousins a lot more than I thought I did. I've come away thinking Patrick Mahomes is a lot more annoying than I thought he was, but he's still the best quarterback in football. But yeah, the offense should be good. It's a massive year for Kirk Cousins, but really they have to get better on defense. And they brought in Brian Flores, the ex-Dolphins head coach, ex-Steelers linebacker coach, and Patriots defensive coordinator as well. And offense, it's basically Kirk Cousins. Can he not step up, but can he play consistently solid like he also always has done? But can he win playoff games? And can he win, on prime time when everyone's watching him? That's the thing with Kirk Cousins. It always has been. A huge year for Kirk, and the defense has to step up this year. That's the two stories of the Vikings, really, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I was only sniggering when you said about Cousins being perfect for the Niners, because you sort of think how many quarterbacks can the Niners actually get on their depth chart? But
it's true. He is.
Of course he is, and obviously, like you said, there's the connections there, like you say, in terms of the style of play and everything, isn't there? So I really like Kirk Cousins. I didn't need the Netflix show. I think whenever he's done sort of stuff on Sky in the postseason, he tends to be on the
really
Super
good at
Bowls,
that.
and he's been really good as part of the coverage. So a little bit similar to what we talked about with Jared Goff earlier, isn't it? You're going to struggle to improve upon Kirk Cousins if Kirk Cousins is your quarterback, because you're going to have a reasonable record. So how do you actually facilitate it? And that's obviously the position that Minnesota have found themselves in. It's a really difficult one to predict because, as you say, who on earth wins 11 one-score games? And that was, I think, every one-score game. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was
11-0 it was.
Yeah, which just doesn't happen, does it? And
it's weird because the year before they won no one-score games, and then last year they won they won all of them. So it shows it can fluctuate. I mean, ultimately you think it probably level out this year. That's the kind of thing. So you're looking at probably 6 and 5, that kind of thing. Maybe 7 and 4 if it was 11 one-score games you played, but. That's the thing with the Vikings. 13 wins. They were one of the best teams in the NFC last year. It's just can they win the division again? They're not the favourites this year, but they are certainly up there. And I mean, some people may class them as the favourites as well, because obviously that's how betting odds work. It's just what people put the money on. But roster-wise, they're very talented. They've got the best receiver in football. Again, they've brought back their main pass rusher into Daniel Hunter, who there was talks he could be traded away early last week, but he's restructured his deal. They've signed Marcus Davenport as well from the Saints. That happened in free agency too, and you've got some DBs as well coming in. You've got Yoiwan Williams, who comes over from the Patriots, who was with Brian Flores in I think his first year in New England, and you've got Byron Murphy from the Cardinals as well. There's more DBs adding to obviously they moved on from Cameron Dantzler this year. He's gone to Buffalo, so the secondary is completely different. Flores likes his man coverage corners, so that's what he's after really. The defense should be better. Obviously, you still got the likes of Harrison Smith in there. Is still pretty good. Talent wise, it's just whether they can will they get beaten up and in the air like they have recently. That's the thing, because there are a lot of games that are shootouts last year with the Vikings. That's another thing. That game in Buffalo, for example, the one that went to overtime. Josh Allen scored within about 7 seconds of the Vikings thinking they won the game, and it's very much, this is a big if for Minnesota, because if Kirk Cousins does go, what do you do? So this is the end of your window. This is because this is it. So can you? And they are one of the most talented teams in the NFC. They are you probably put clearly ahead of them, I'd say Philadelphia, San Francisco, Dallas. That and Dallas, you could flip flop. That's it. And you got Detroit with them, and those are the 5 best teams in the NFC. Most talented teams in the NFC, in my opinion. Especially they're on the older side as well. When the likes of Seattle were young, they've got playoff experience. Can they win the playoffs? That's the story. That's the thing with Minnesota.
Yeah, I think you'd be disappointed if the Vikings didn't make the playoffs as a bare minimum.
They've got to. They have to.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, take the 1-score games aside. Let's say, like you say, they even half what happened last year. That would have put them last year at something like a 10-7 record.
So they still would have won the division anyway.
So they'd have still been there or thereabouts, as you say, and certainly overall the NFC doesn't feel as strong as the AFC. So in terms of the wild card, even 9-8 probably gets you in. I would be amazed if the Vikings don't finish as a minimum of 9-8. I think, as you say, they've got the best receiver, or certainly the receiver that's got the potential to be the best for the next, X number of years. In Justin Jefferson, be interesting to see how he gets on without his running mate. His name is escaping me. Who's the wide receiver that's gone? That's the one.
They did bring in Jordan Allison as well. That is a thing. So they've lost Adam Thielen, but they did spend a first round pick on a receiver in Jordan Allison, who actually he's the only rookie that's going into a situation where he's clearly the number 2 target. They've got KJ Osborne as well, who's had a good couple of years. Last year was really good, KJ Osborne, but all the other rookie receivers go into number 3, whether it's Jackson Smith and Jigba, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers. They're all going to be number 3 options this year. When Jordan Addison would probably be number 2, and if he could take a first year if he could have a first year like Justin Jefferson did, then that would be really special. It's not good. It probably won't happen, but
they'd take that name.
The Vikings, although they have hit on receivers a lot recently. Obviously, Diggs, Justin Jefferson, that is Minnesota's territory really. So obviously there is Jordan Addison there too, but it'd be interesting to see how he does fare with a new person alongside him.
Yeah. I think the offense will do enough. I think, like you say, there's certainly some really, really good talent on that offense. I think they're probably weaker at running back than they were. I think Alexander Mattison has had the odd game here and there where he's proved to be an adequate, replacement short term for Dalvin Cook. But I'm not suggesting it was the wrong thing to move on from Dalvin Cook. I think he was certainly sort of picking up more injuries and on the back 9 of his career. But
it's how valuable he is as well. It shows with running back position. Mattison's came out from nowhere really a couple of years ago for Minnesota. Came in and produced a pretty good level of play when Cook was injured. Then Cook came back in the lineup, took the majority of the carries again. But how valuable was Dalvin Cook to this team? That's the question, because if Mattison can come in and do what he did in those few games all season, then you're like, okay, that's another running back who didn't deserve to have a big contract.
Yeah, it's always diminishing returns with running back, isn't it? And it's a shame, really. And, it's a debate for another day and another podcast, I guess. But I think, like I say, offensively, they'll do enough. I thought that the trade last year for TJ Hawkinson was a really good one. I think he's one of the premier tight ends. So that gives them, obviously, another option in the passing game. I agree. I think they've obviously sort of invested a lot of the resources in the defence throughout the course of free agency and throughout the off-season. Like the additions that they've made in the secondary. As you say, I think the addition of Brian Flores, who obviously isn't going to play, but he's certainly going to get them organised. He'll get them hard-nosed. There'll be a lot more press man. And like you say, I think he's got a proven track record of improving defences where he's been. So
the first year in Miami, the year that Miami went to tank, really, that he got a defense playing really hard towards the end of the season. Yeah. Obviously, winning 5 games towards the end of the season, winning the game against Cincinnati, that was sort of the decider for the number 1 overall pick. And a lot of the people that came through that team of basically undrafted free agents still play on that team now. They're like Nick Needham. There are plenty of players that Brian Flores brought through that are still regulars for the Dolphins today, about 4 years later. That he can certainly coach lesser talent.
Yeah, no, most definitely, mate, most definitely. And as you say, I just think based on, I've made my views clear, I think, on Green Bay, and I've made my views pretty clear on Chicago. I don't think either of those 2 teams enter the conversation. I do think this is a straight fight between Minnesota and Detroit, and just by that alone, you would fancy, certainly on paper, the Vikings are going to start the 4 games against Chicago and Green Bay as favourites. Let's assume they get the 4 wins there. That's 4. They're only going to need to pick up 5 out of the other 12 games, which, like I say, the Vikings will make the playoffs. And as you say, it will then be a case of
with
what can
Detroit
Kirk
as well.
Cousins do? Yeah, what can Kirk Cousins do in prime time? And as you say, with the contract year and all the rest of it, I think the Vikings are going to be in one of those really difficult positions next off-season that we've talked about earlier. I don't think they're going to find a realistic way of improving on him, but they may well have to have that decision that actually, what do we do here? Because if we pay him, we're probably resigning ourselves to another 4 or 5 years of being there or thereabouts, but probably never quite getting over the hump. So, interesting season for Minnesota.
If they pay him as well, the cap hits me more because he was on like 30 million a year. I think that was the highest paid deal at the time. Obviously, that's gone up by like 20 million now. So he's going to have more of a cap hit if they do re-sign him anyway. So then that'll be lesser talent on as a consequence. There is also that as well. So yeah, again, obviously we're talking about off season already, but Minnesota this year is a big year for them because it really sums up what they're going to do in the off season. But that's pretty much it today for these division previews. Obviously, again, these 2 divisions have pretty interesting teams throughout them because there's a lot of unknown there, and obviously what happens is unknown for now. But I think we've sort of summed up what each team's strengths and weaknesses are, haven't we, really, Shaun? Just to finish today, I just wanted to plug the NFL kickoff party at Felson's in Birmingham. You can join us in Birmingham for our first ever NFL kickoff party. Celebrate the start of the 2023 NFL season with us at Felson's in Birmingham as we start it strong. You can watch Week 1 Sunday's NFL action with us, win prizes throughout the night, and there is also pool and shuffleboard available. Go to www.full10yards.co.uk/kickoff to get your ticket and learn more about what's in store, where you can also buy a bundle with the Full 10 Yard preview guide, can't you, Shaun?
You certainly can, mate. Yeah, the season guide is in production as we speak. It is going to be available as a standalone product as well, so if you can't make it to Birmingham or you've got other plans, you can purchase a season guide separately. full10yards.co.uk/guide will get you the details there, but certainly encourage you to look into that bundle because we joked about it the other day, but when you think about everything at the minute, you're going to get a pretty thorough season guide produced by local lads, all British fans. Lots of energy and passion that's gone into it, and you're going to get to spend week 1 with fellow NFL fans in Birmingham with a couple of free drinks. We're basically paying for you to get knowledge and come and have a good time. So, seems like a good deal to me, mate.
Yeah, and I mean, I touch wood should be there as well. It just depends on whether my internship, whether my team are home or away that I'm working with this year for the season. That's the only real thing because I work for a women's team which play on Sunday. But other than that, like with the fixtures not yet released, we don't know. But I should be there, and it'd be lovely to meet all the listeners and obviously all the writers that I've not had the chance to meet yet either. But better one, I've been working with the company for a few years now. But that's pretty much it. I would plug the guide as well. A lot of us have worked very hard on the guide. It's a great season guide. It's it's going to be about this thick. It's really a lot of pages full. Every division covered, every team covered, a lot of positions covered as well. I've got a callback ranking in there myself, which some may want to see because there are some controversial opinions in there, but I won't say anything else for now. But yeah, do buy the guide. It does help the UK community as well out with Britball and everything. It's a great thing to do. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you for listening to the Full 10 NFL podcast, Full 10 Yards NFL podcast. This is my first one. It's been great to have the podcast hosting role, and it will only get better from here as well. But so thank you for listening to that. Thank you for coming along, Shaun, again. It's been nice to have you back on the podcast so soon as well, and we'll see you next time.